Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to run, kick, or flee from your inner critic, then do we have the Make Peace with Your Mind show for you. Today I'll be talking with Mark Coleman, Senior Meditation Teacher at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, founder of the Mindfulness Institute, and author of a fantastic book on taming your inner critic, Make Peace with Your Mind. And that's just what we'll be talking about today, about how mindfulness and compassion can free you from your inner critic. That plus we'll talk about punk rock and anarchy, Velcro and Teflon, Einstein and invisible swindling, how to love your neighbors when you don't like them, how Mr. Mindfulness wins the day, the power of oh please, and why even mindfulness teachers sometimes can't find their keys or their cars. So welcome to the show, Mark. Are you ready to shine?
Yes, I am. Great to be here.
Glad to have you here, and a mighty woohoo!
Woohoo!
Awesome. So before we dive right into things, I've got to ask, what were you like in your late teens?
Well, my late teens, I was a punk rocker. I was an anarchist. I was living in London. I was pretty wild. I made my own clothes. I was squatting houses. But I was also a pretty angry, confused young man trying to figure out life, why I was unhappy. I thought the problem was with the government and with all the violence and oppression that was around me. And I thought, why am I so, unhappy and why is life so difficult? And so I started looking and questing and searching different spiritual teachers and psychology and just anything that would help me figure out how to live this life without being so unhappy.
So, and if I understand right, in London's rundown East End in 1984, you found something pretty special.
I did. So I was living around the corner from a Buddhist meditation center, which was pretty unusual back then. Now meditation centers are $2 a penny and there's one in every corner. But back then, Buddhism was obscure. Meditation and mindfulness was unheard of for the most part. And here were these people teaching, running classes, and I walked in and I saw that these people had a certain quality of presence and grounded stillness. And I thought, I don't know what that is they have, but I want some of it. And I jumped in and started meditating, and it was really the answer that I was looking for.
Fantastic. Can you tell us, what were the first 2 skills or tools that you learned while you were there? Yeah,
so the first skill was mindfulness, which is this capacity to be aware, to know your experience, to know what's happening in your mind, body, and heart and environment without judgment or reactivity. And that's really the foundational skill for anything that we do, any meditation or any life skill. And then the second tool was kindness, the cultivation of loving kindness and compassion. How do we meet ourselves and each other and life with friendliness and care rather than judgment or hostility? And those 2 skills, which I regard as 2 wings of the bird, wisdom and clarity of awareness, wisdom, clarity of awareness and compassion, they're the 2 wings that really we need to navigate through life.
Fantastic. And it sounds like it was extremely important back then, because you talked about how unconsciously you were taking the anger that you had at the world around you and kind of flipping the mirror and focusing it right back on yourself.
Right. And I think we all do that. We generally have an external orientation, and often if we're unhappy or struggling, we look to blame something, a person, an institution, the government, society. And rarely do we actually turn that lens of attention inwards and say, wait a minute, what am I bringing to this? How am I contributing to my stress or my difficulty or my unhappiness? And so what meditation does is allows us to turn that gaze inwards and see, well, what am I doing? What am I adding to this? Where am I not seeing my contribution to my own stress or reactivity?
Do you remember, if you go back in time, do you remember what you were journaling about at the time and what you were expressing back then?
Yeah, I do. I still have those journals, and they're incredibly depressing.
Oh, no.
I was I wonder why.
Do not read.
Yeah, do not read. I was sad. I was down on myself. I was very critical and judgmental, and I was depressed, basically. I was finding life challenging, and I had a very bleak, cynical, pessimistic outlook, which was kind of sad for a young man. I had, a lot of opportunity in some ways. I was at college and, But the mind, left to its own devices can be a terrible thing. And I had a slant, a negativity bias, which really just focused on what was wrong and what was problematic, both of myself and the world. And that leads to a very depressed state of mind.
I love what you say early on in your book, don't believe everything you think.
Yeah, very important phrase and understanding. It's actually a bumper sticker I see often in California, don't believe everything you think, because we do. And we think whatever our mind says is true, is objective, is rational. And if we actually pay attention, we see what our mind thinks is, often random, it's conditioned, it comes from the book that we just read or a conversation or what our parents told us when we were 3. And sometimes it's accurate, but often our perspective is very subjective, it's conditioned and relative. And about ourself, our self-assessment is often very slanted towards what's wrong, what's deficient, what's not enough, and very inaccurate. And if we actually compared our self-assessment to, say, our friends' assessment of us, they'd be quite different. And when we believe that negative story, we actually feel belittled, we feel, down, we feel, depressed often.
I'm thinking of English comedies, and I'm thinking a little bit about your upbringing, and I don't think this is just a problem of the English, but you talk about a negativity bias, and you weren't exactly raised to say, I'm on top of the world.
Right. So it was very interesting for me when I came to California in my mid-20s, and in California, it is okay to say, hey, I'm great. It's a fantastic day, and I just accomplished this great thing in my job, and in England, that's considered a little gauche and, not very socially welcome. So I learned also in my conditioning to, the most one could exclaim was, if how are you doing today is, well, not bad, you're all right. That's considered great for the most part. And so, we're affected by where we grew up and how we're conditioned. And so that was also a layer of my own conditioning that I think led to a certain dampening of one's natural well-being.
Well, it makes sense. If you're afraid, or not even afraid, if you're wired not to express to the world how good things are going or how shiny and bright things are, then internally you're tamping down as well, and you instead go looking for maybe the other side of things.
Right. You see things through that lens, and you seek out things that mirror your perspective, whether it's friends or political views or, media that confirm that image or self-image or view. Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting is you talk a lot about your clinics in the book and workshops. And one of the things you talk about is the realization when somebody realizes they may not be the only, quote, I put this in big quotes, loser in the room, that we not only do we shame ourselves, but we double shame ourselves.
Right. Yeah, we do a lot of double shaming about a whole lot of things, including that we judge ourselves, that we're down on ourselves, that we have a critic. And yeah, it's one of the things that I think is most affirming for people in my workshops is I have people write down their judgments, which of course can be scary for people to actually get it out of the murkiness of their heads onto paper, and then fear that someone else might actually see what they say about them. And then I have them share them with a person or two, which is equally scary because, oh my God, I'm going to take these dark, horrible secrets and share them with the public. But what people find is like, oh, wait a minute, your judgments are kind of similar to my judgments. I'm not enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not cute enough, I should have done more, I should have done better. And we basically see, if we have a mind, for the most part, we're likely to have some kind of critical, negative, self-berating habit. And once we see that, it's like, oh, I'm not a loser for having that. It's just part of being human. And if that's the case, then I can accept that. I don't need to beat up on myself about it. I just need to find constructive tools how to work with it.
I am not my thoughts.
I am not my thoughts. So just notice for those who are listening, if you apply that to yourself right now, what do you feel? Like, does it give you a little space or perspective on those thoughts tumbling around in your mind?
I was fascinated if we jump ahead to the imposter syndrome, and we had on Amy Cuddy a while back on Presence, and we were talking about the imposter syndrome. But I was blown away that you gave this quote about Einstein, who towards the end of his life admitted to being an involuntary swindler.
Yeah, it's amazing how many well-known, brilliant, famous, successful people have a sense of, I'm not good enough. I think I quote from Mary Angelou, who talks about, if people only knew, like she believes that this time, this novel, people are going to find out she's really a fraud.
Your quote is, she had written 11 books, and this is the time.
And they're going to find out. Or Sheryl Sandberg, who's COO of Facebook, incredibly brilliant, smart, successful woman running one of the biggest companies in the world, and still feeling like, if people only knew what I was like inside, I'd get fired, right? Or if my partner really finds out what I'm really like on the inside, they'll walk. And so we carry around this sense of fraudulence because we listen to the critics saying, we're not really that smart. We're not really a nice person. We're really not as good as we portray to people. And so the more that we listen to those messages, the more we get down on our value, our skills, our intelligence, our gifts. And so we walk around with a sense of, oh my God, I can't show my real self because people will see that I'm not up to grade. And that's a really terrible thing to walk around with because, we are inherently good and kind and smart and generous, etc.
So earlier we were talking about double shame, and this is kind of another double, but in kind of a twisted backwards flip and half inverted, which is, you are a mindfulness teacher, a mindfulness instructor, a mindfulness expert, and yet you sometimes still lose your keys, and your mind must do what?
Right. So I talk about this in the book a fair bit. I try to normalize my experience because people think, oh, he's a meditation teacher. He's been practicing mindfulness forever. He must be perfect and never lose things and never get angry or stressed. And it's like, no, I'm a human being and I, have lapses of attention and I forget where I put my keys or my wallet or my cell phone and I'm running out the door and I'm perhaps a little late for a meeting and I get stressed because I want to be on time and I can't find something and then I know our critic generally gets triggered in certain predictable situations, like for me losing my keys, or for someone else it might be getting annoyed with their kids, or someone at work might be not doing the perfect presentation. And so when we know those kind of trigger points for the critic, I know my critic's going to be like, oh, so you think you're a mindfulness teacher? Well, how come, you're losing your keys? And I just say to myself, or to the critic, I say, oh, Mr. Mindfulness wins the day. I make a joke of it because, I lose my keys, stuff happens, and I'm human. And if I can laugh about it, it's not a problem. It's just, here I am doing my human thing and, shit happens. What can I say?
I like it. If you could put that, not the shit happening, but what does it mean you are, go for it.
Stuff happens.
No, anyway. What does it mean you are not your fault?
You are not your fault. So this is one of my favorite lines. This comes from a friend of mine called Wes Niska, who is a colleague and teacher. And he looks at humanness from the perspective of evolutionary biology. And if you take that vantage point, we are how we are because of, our culture, because of the family we were born into, because of our genetics, because of our social, religious conditioning. There's a whole bunch of factors that make us up to be who we are that we have very little control over. As an adult, we can start influencing some of those things and who we hang out with and what church we go to and what practices we do and what work we do. But up to that point, so much of our life is conditioned by all these factors around us. And then we blame ourselves for having a tall body or a fat body or a skinny body, or we blame ourselves for having a too vulnerable heart, or we blame ourselves for being too anxious in social situations because as a child we got traumatized by who knows what. And that really is doubly cruel. Why do we have those things anyway? Whether it's, we have diabetes or we have, we're born and we're 4'7", or we're, who knows what, we have anxious disposition. That's hard enough as it is. And then to give ourselves a hard time is just so painful. And it's really most of that stuff is not our fault. We're just born the way we are. It's not to say we don't have responsibility to learn, to grow, to cultivate things, and to work on ourselves in a certain way. But so much of our basic hardwiring is as it is. And so to judge ourselves is really, one, unnecessary, unhelpful, and really doubly painful.
So, and you spoke about several interesting things in there. One is about childhood and kids, us being as we are. Maybe you can tell us about, it's one of the ways that kids are really hardwired or get hardwired, the cycle of shaming in boys and girls as they're young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so were you referring to the external shaming or the internal? Or
well,
both?
We've got both going on, and then I'd love to dive into even Sheryl Sandberg, who you mentioned a few minutes ago, saying about what happens to girls when they try to display leadership skills. We'll get there.
Right. Yeah. So the critic originally develops in childhood, when we're very young, actually, because as infants we have strong feelings, emotions, passions, impulses. And a lot of those aren't so welcome in the family system. If you're a rageful kid, or you're a very sad kid, or you cry a lot, or you're needy, right? A lot of family systems, like, that's not okay. And so you have to find a way to rein that in to keep the flow of love and approval and affection from your caregivers and family. So we develop, the way that we shut those strong feelings and passions down is through shaming, through this force of the critic. What happens is that is necessary and useful as a young child. As we get older, we don't need to be doing that, but that mental habit and structure basically maintains itself and grows as we get older, and so we start shaming and judging ourselves for all kinds of things that are not so helpful.
I read about this, I wrote about it, and I'd love to get some clarity on it. When you're talking about kids, they're young, even if they're getting unconditional love, you're saying because we, meaning the child, is trying to fit in and please mom and dad, he or she is going to curb emotions to fit in, and that starts a huge cycle of frustration and shame within ourselves.
Yeah, it starts off the cycle of learning how to shut those energies down with judgment and shame. And that's where the critic grows its strength. Freud discovered this early on. He called it the superego, shutting down the impulses of the id. But we can see it in children where, they're having a tantrum, they're in the supermarket, they're screaming, and they have to find a way to rein it in because mom and dad's very unhappy. And it may take them a while to rein it in, but they will, to fit into that family system.
And then if we look then at external shame, what's going on with kids?
And then external shaming. So then parents mostly passing on what was said to them. So Johnny likes to throw his toast on the floor, and mom and dad think that's a really bad idea. And when they did that when they were kids, they were told they were bad boys and bad girls, and only bad boys make a mess at the table.
Oh no.
And so the child internalizes that as, it's not the throwing of the toast that's bad, I am a bad person for doing that. And so if we hear that enough, then we develop this, again, self-reflective process of, I must be a bad boy, a bad girl if I do these things, if I have these thoughts, if I have these impulses. And so that's why it's really important to shift as parents from person-centered praise and blame to process-centered blame. So, hey, Johnny, it's really not great when you make a mess at the table because mommy has to clean up, versus you're a bad boy for making a mess at the table. And when children hear that for, 5 or 10 years, that messaging of being bad boy and girl goes in. And we carry that as a sense of shame and not good enough and sometimes worthlessness.
I think of myself as very lucky growing up that I latched onto sports. I latched onto something that I was good at. I became first I was in drama, and then I became a cyclist, and I even went over to race in Europe for a few years. And thank God I turned to the bicycle because I had a diagnosis very early, 5 and then again at 7, as being a poster child for ADD. And all I knew is that every adult told me, in my mind, how bad of a person I was. And I think a lot of people who get that diagnosis or that shaming eventually go, if you think I'm bad, I might as well just be bad because clearly that's who I am.
Right. Yes. You get a lot of kids acting out that messaging either out of rebellion or out of, well, screw it. If I can't actually be good, then I may as well just let those impulses let them rip.
Yeah. So can you tell us briefly, you mentioned Sheryl Sandberg earlier, COO of Facebook, and what she talks about with girls displaying natural leadership skills early on and what happens to them often.
Yeah, so when we break out of the norm, so for instance, when we break out of the stereotypical cultural norms where girls are supposed to be nice and quiet and good and deferential, and in her case, she's talking about girls who display natural qualities of leadership, of strength, of either being critical or displaying autonomy and leadership skills. They're often viewed as bossy, and it's viewed negatively because it's shifting out of a stereotypical norm, what some would call internal oppression, keeping people oppressed in a certain format. What happens is that gets internalized, so the girls then think, oh, if I'm really strong and clear and visionary, I get that gets treated, that gets ridiculed as being bossy and negative. So girls learn to rein that in the same way that boys, if they display intimacy, warmth, tenderness, vulnerability, they're, in most sort of macho-oriented cultures, they're treated as weak, as effeminate, and it's a negative stereotype, and so they have to suppress that perhaps natural side of themselves. And so in both sides, we learn to internalize those voices. So boys learn the voice of toughen up, get on with it, deal, be a man, toughen up, right? And girls have similar stereotypical internalized voices that the critic takes on and may last for decades, actually.
I'm thinking, I'm sorry, Mom. Mom, I love you so much. I'm thinking of going to a bike race as a kid, and she was practicing tough love is what she called it, and putting it in quotes. And she told me, I hope you crash today. And what she really meant was, I want you to toughen up. I want you to grit through. I want you to push through the pain, kind of the male macho side of things.
Right.
I don't think that was the message I got, but we internalize this stuff. We internalize this junk, and then we throw it right back at ourselves. We tend to own it. Maybe you can tell us for a moment the importance of reflecting on the ways we express innate goodness so that we can start to shift all that muck that's going on in the mind.
Right. So, our self-reflection process is definitely filtered through the critic. So and we have a negativity bias, which I talk about in the book, where we oriented towards the negative, towards what we're not doing well, towards the ways we're not right or smart enough or good enough and all of that. Because of that lens, because of that negative-oriented lens, we don't tend to look so much about what's good, the ways that we might be kind, generous, supportive, caring, smart, the times that we excel. And so because of that tendency, we don't see a balanced picture in ourselves. We tend to see the deficiency and not the goodness. And if we start to, and so there's several chapters in the book that orient towards taking in the good, orienting to the positive in ourselves and others, which is really a practice. And I learned this in the community I was living in in my early 20s, and we would do feedback circles where we'd give people positive and constructive feedback. Yeah. And it was the first time people would actually reflect back some qualities that I didn't even know I had in myself, like generosity or, caring or, leadership skills or whatever. And so I began to see, oh, wait a minute, there's more to me than just how my critic views myself. And the more that we actually take notice of it, the more it can actually land, so we actually have a balanced view of ourselves, and we can actually feel that sense of goodness that comes from seeing ourselves in a balanced way.
I like that. There's something I call the disease of the more. You have a chapter of knowing when enough is enough. Maybe you can tell us what happened with James at Land Capital, who scored a major $30 million coup.
Yeah. So this is an interesting story of what I call the mantra of not enough, which the critic likes to drum into us as well as our culture, actually. And so James is working in this successful hedge fund. It's pre-crash, so it's the booming early mid-2000s. And he's been involved in a complicated series of trades with a particular company. And that day he closed on this deal that made the company upwards of $30 million or more. And I'm going in to see him in the afternoon, do some consulting and coaching. And I expect to see a very jubilant, relaxed, happy person who's made more money in a day than many people in the world will make in a lifetime. And he looks a little perturbed, a little stressed. And I'm like, what's up with this picture? How are you doing today? I heard I heard it was a good day for the company and for you. And he said, well, it was, but I know I should have, if I just held on a few more hours, I actually would have made, a few more million. And if I'd bought earlier, when I was tracking the company, I knew I would have been more successful. And so even in that, what we regard as pinnacle of material success, it wasn't enough. And it was so clear that to that state of mind, it's never enough. No matter how much beauty or love or money or success or material stuff, it's never enough. Even Rockefeller said, one can never have enough money.
I also heard some very dangerous, I'll call them dangerous words in there. Shoulda, woulda, and I'll throw a third one in there, coulda.
Exactly, right. So if we listen to that mind of coulda, woulda, shoulda, so there's a chapter in the book I call 20/20 hindsight. Mm-hmm. And if we look back, right, we always coulda, woulda, shoulda done something different. We could have bought we could have bought Apple stock in 1985, or we could have, not invested in, whatever stock crashed, or, bought a house just in 2006 before the house prices sunk, or, or chose a relationship that turned out to be very dysfunctional. It's very easy to look back and see how we could have, would have, should have done anything. And I know this mind state very well. It's one of the stickiest places I get caught. Mm-hmm. Is I look back and go, and if I listen to my critic, I could have, would have, should have done something different, better, happier, faster. And it's really cruel because we do the best we can in the moment with the information we have. And we have to trust that. And no amount of looking back on it will change it or actually improve it. Occasionally we can learn and say, I can learn from my mistakes, but not with that negative, punitive part of the mind.
Yeah. My inner critic, it goes further. I think might use the term snooze alarm syndrome, which is it puts me between a rock and a hard place to ensure that whether I get up right away or I sleep in and it's going to be okay, either way, I've done it wrong.
Right. And I talk about that in the book, that, the critic sometimes masquerades as the coach that said, and you're on this New Year's resolution to get fit, and it's 5:30 a.m. and the alarm goes off, and the critic masquerading as a coach says, mm-hmm. I just read that research about sleep is so important. Maybe you should sleep today and do the exercise tomorrow. So you hit snooze, and then it's 8 o'clock and suddenly you're late for work. You haven't exercised, and now the critic comes as the tyrant who says, you're such a slob, you've failed again, you never follow through with your commitments, and you're a loser. You can't lose. You can't win.
So let's throw something positive into the mix then. What's the importance of gratitude?
So gratitude is, especially in relationship to the not enough mantra, mm-hmm. gratitude is a way of turning towards seeing what we have. We have, whatever that is, seeing the positive in ourselves, in our life circumstances, in our relationships, in our security or safety, and of course we all have different levels of blessing in our lives, but we can always point to something that we can be blessed for, whether it's being alive, or having friends, mm-hmm. having a job, or being safe in our homes, or having enough to eat, right? So there's always some circumstances, and that helps balance the negative orientation of, I don't have enough. The saying, my body's healthy right now, and I do have friends, and I have something to eat in the fridge, and there's water coming out of the faucet, and I'm not cold, and there's a lot to be thankful for. And that really shifts the mind state in any moment.
I call that the woohoo! So can you tell us, we're talking about the impact of the critic, and I think of when my critic really gets going, it's hard to think clearly. And you talk, these are fascinating, both brain fog and exhaustion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what's important to understand about the critic is it usually manifests through words, through, you're not good enough, that was stupid, you're never going to get your life together, some kind of idea about ourselves or judgment about some action or past behavior. That then, in turn, can create mental fog. Mm-hmm. For example, I'm a writer, so when I'm writing and I know the critic's operating the background, or I'm trying to write, but the critic's in the background saying, this is really stupid. You're not really a writer. And no one's going to like this. And so that creates a certain doubt and second guessing, and I start to feel dull and foggy. And then my energy affects us energetically. I start to feel heavy. It's like, what's the point? I may as well give up. Let's just, throw the towel in, do some email. And then it affects us emotionally. We start to feel like, yeah, I'm not really a good writer, and I may as well just throw the towel in. And so then we start feeling hopeless or depressed. So we can operate on those different levels. And what's important is if we start to see those symptoms like fogginess, dullness, heaviness, then it's important to ask the question, what might my critic be saying that might have led to that? And I'll often sort of go backwards and go, oh yeah, I remember my friend talking about my book yesterday, and he was quite critical of a certain chapter, and then that started this negative run of doubt of, yeah, I'm not really a good writer.
Wow.
So it's good to ask yourself, what might my judge be saying that I haven't caught that I can actually challenge that view?
And so if you catch that, what's your next step?
So then I'll ask, so I'll clarify the thought, like, I'm a terrible writer. And then I'll bring inquiry, and I'll ask, is that really true? Am I really a terrible writer? I've written 2 books. I've written poetry. I've gotten a lot of good feedback about it. It's clearly helped people. I may not be the best writer in the world, but I don't need to be. I just need to be a writer that can actually write that helps some people. So I bring a sort of rational inquiry and investigation. I might ask the question, why did that thought happen? It came from a fear of wanting people to like my writing. So there's a vulnerability there. So I might hold that with kindness and go, it's okay. I don't need to be hard on myself. I'm not going to die if someone doesn't like my writing. It's fine for people not to like my writing. And I have to find that place in myself that knows that what I do is good enough.
I like, there's a term I use. It kind of goes along with kindness and compassion. I call it kind, gentle, easy, good. That I wish for everything to be kind, gentle, easy, good. And when I think, you said something really important there, having to do with how high of a bar you set. I don't need to be the best writer in the world. I just need to, kind of paraphrasing here, help people. You made a kind, gentle, easy, good bar that I think was a best case for everyone. So the critic has a very high standard. It's usually an impossibly high standard of perfection, really. And if we can come to a more, as you say, kind, easy, good, gentle perspective, then it's like, I like the mantra, what's good enough? My writing's good enough. How I look is good enough. My talk and lecture is good enough. And I do the best I can, but I let go of thinking it should or could be perfect, because there's no such thing as perfect. There's what we do. Some people like it, some people don't, and we let go. Beautiful. Let's go from there. Let's talk about mindfulness and multitasking. And you had a statistic in here that kind of shocked me. This is a U.S. statistic, 1.6 million crashes each year from people on cell phones.
And that number is sadly rising because cell phone use is going up, texting use is going up. It's becoming normalized to be texting while talking, while eating, while driving, while doing anything. And so why mindfulness is so helpful is because it helps us bring attention to the present moment. And what the research is showing is that we can't really multitask. The brain actually only unitasks, which means it goes from texting to driving, to texting to driving, or talking and emailing. So we think we can do both well. We have this slight delusion that we can pull it off. But actually, the brain's very masterful at flitting back and forwards quickly. So to the extent that we're, say texting while we're driving, often we're driving 70 miles an hour, our car may have driven 300 feet or 200 meters while having texted 2 words. So no wonder there's so much more accidents. And so the idea with mindfulness is we're learning to be present to what we're doing, including driving, which means getting off our phones and actually just driving.
One of the interesting things you talk about is that, and this may have been because of at least one Harvard study that came out, but that the boring activities that we think we need to daydream, check out, or do something else at the same time, it doesn't make us happier to tune out. If anything, it's the richness, maybe to quote Thich Nhat Hanh, maybe the richness of being present when you're washing the dishes that brings the juice.
Yeah, this is a very interesting study. So the data was that we, on average, they did a study of several thousand people, and people were on average not present to what they were doing 47% of the day, which is basically half the day, which is half your life, half your waking life, basically. So, which is sad because, you know, as they say in Vegas, you have to be present to win. You have to be present to enjoy the sunrise and your child's smile and your colleague's handshake and the beautiful fall leaves or whatever it is we're experiencing. And so, and as the research showed, even when we're present, as you say, to walking the dog, chopping the carrots, washing the dishes, cleaning the house, that there's something very satisfying about being connected to what we're doing. And even though we think, oh, I've got a long drive through Nevada, I may as well check out and spin my mind and thoughts for 5 hours. It's actually, I know for myself, it's much more satisfying when I'm fully engaged and I'm feeling the steering wheel, I'm looking out the window and I'm seeing the colors and I'm smelling the air. That's just so much more a full experience. And then, of course, if we've practiced that, then when we are in the woods or with friends or making love or enjoying art or music, then, of course, we're going to be much more present because we've trained ourselves how to be present for the mundane times, so we're more present for the rich times.
How do we start to train ourselves to be more present?
So we start in this moment, we start being present to our bodies. The body's always in the present moment. So if we can feel our body sitting in the chair, if we can be aware of our senses, of what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're smelling, that's a very ordinary way to be present. And then we can cultivate through training. So meditation is a training of the mind. And the most commonly taught practice for beginning meditation training is to pay attention to your breath. You sit down quietly for a minute, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, however long you have, and you simply attend to the breath. You notice, you feel, you sense the in-breath and the out-breath. And each time the attention wanders, which it will hundreds of times in a single meditation, you notice that and you come back. So it's the training, just like we train at the gym to, do reps. We do reps with the mind of learning to bring the attention over and over just to hear, to the breath or to the body or to a sound or an emotion or a feeling or an experience. And then that training then ripples out to being present in a conversation, being present to eating, being present to walking the dog, being present to playing sports. And we begin to we internalize it so it becomes available all the time.
I like it. From there, let's talk about being present or how we can recognize kind of that inner critic or the judging thoughts that, I was going to say start to pop up, that are always popping up.
So as we develop that lens of attention, then we're also learning to turn that lens inward, and we're starting to see and notice our minds, our thoughts, the kind of thoughts when judgments are present. So the first step with mindfulness is to recognize a difference between just our ordinary thinking and musing and speculating and ruminating to a judging thought which has a specific quality, which is a negative tone, and it's usually implying something about ourselves that we're therefore lesser than, we're not worthy of, or that we're bad. And so we first want to use that awareness to see, when am I simply thinking and when am I judging? And then once we see we're judging, then we can apply a lot of the antidotes that I recommend in the book.
So let's talk about antidotes and how in the world we get a Teflon mind.
Yeah. So a Teflon mind actually comes from mindfulness. Mindfulness is we learn to simply be present to experience and see everything coming and going without getting caught in it. So, for example, if we see that we're judging versus, when we're caught in a judging thought, we did something, we forgot our friend's birthday and we're on our case and we're judging and shouting, and when we're in that, there's no space. We're just lost in feeling bad and regret and guilt. And then we get mindful and we say, oh, look at that. I'm really giving myself a hard time. Yes, I forgot my friend's birthday. I'll make it up. We'll take care of it. And the judgment is not really necessary. It's just an additional layer of shaming. So we notice the judgment and we let it go. And then we come back to whatever's happening. So that seeing allows us to disengage and allows it to roll off us.
What does it mean? A minute ago you said, and we don't have the space to, and you continued, what does it mean to get the space in our minds?
So the space, again, comes from awareness. So, how many times have you been say lost, especially if you've been in meditation training, if you're meditating and you're lost in thought, but it could be anywhere. You're lost in thought. You're lost in some reactivity, and then some self-awareness comes. Wow, I'm really triggered, or I'm really spaced out here, and we come to that moment of coming to. It's as if it creates space around the experience, and then with that space, we have a little more choicefulness, a little more room to go. Wow, do I want to keep thinking this thought? Do I want to keep being so angry and acting out? Or can I actually find a different response? So it's the recognition that creates a sense of space, that creates choicefulness. There's a lovely phrase from Viktor Frankl. He says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. Like when that email comes in, that really annoying comes in, there's a space. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space lies our power and freedom to choose our response. So with mindfulness, we see their email, we notice it's triggering, we notice the reaction in our body, and then we think, wait a minute, do I want to react out of anger, or do I want to put this in my draft folder and save it for later?
What are some other tools? I know you mentioned one of saying thank you for your opinion. What are some tools we can do with the inner critic in those moments? So as I say in the book, the first is we recognize that, there's judging. And then we can, as you say, usually what we do is we're busy defending, oh no, I'm really a good person, that's not really true, I'm not such as bad as you think I am. And so first we can simply acknowledge it, judging, we can name it as helpful, create the space. I often use humor and a variety of strategies using humor, because when we can find the humor, that we can create space. So I'll say, thank you for your opinion. Like when I can't find my keys and I'm on my way to teach a meditation class. Oh, thank you for your opinion. Anything else you'd like to tell me? Oh, really? I'm a terrible cook too. Okay, thanks. That's really useful. And so it's acknowledging it, and then but not taking it seriously. So ultimately, we want to find an attitude where we're not that interested. We know it's going to happen. It does happen, and we go, oh, that's interesting. Thank you. So it's like a Tai Chi move. We're letting it sort of rush by and not getting so sticky. Or sometimes I'll exaggerate it. Oh, yes, and I really am the worst person in the world. Thank you. I didn't know that. I really am the terrible meditator. There's nobody as bad a meditator as me. And so we're making light of it. Totally diffusing it.
It helps to diffuse it, yeah. And unless you really believe that, then you might want to use a different strategy.
So let's go from there. Let's talk about you not being your own enemy. And I was fascinated by this one. I've experienced this. I think it's a very common thing that we never talk about that. The split you found inside of yourself that a lot of highly successful people find inside of themselves. In the chapter on befriending yourself, you are not your enemy. You talk about the split of you find in yourself where if you head toward the light, you're all focused on the light, you're not diving into the other side of things. And so you almost get a double persona going on with inside of yourself.
Yeah, I think what I can make from your question is the importance of being authentic and real, and having a very accurate self-awareness and self-assessment of both our strengths and our challenges, right? So we all have both. And, as we become more mindful and more self-aware, then we can see ourselves more clearly. We can disengage from the negative view of the critic, but we can also see, and maybe this is what you're pointing to. I'm making this important distinction in the book between discrimination, the healthy qualities of discrimination, discernment, evaluation, which are all necessary skills for moving in the world. I've had lawyers say to me, I can't get rid of my judging mind. How would I operate in court? I say, well, you have discrimination. You can discern, you can evaluate very clearly. The judgment, when I use the word judgment, it has a negative tone, emotional tone, that's oriented towards us being a bad person. So, for example, say, some of your listeners are meditators, and so at the end of the meditation, I'll have my students, just look back and say, what was that meditation like? Just discern, was it focused? Was it distracted? What was distracting you? What qualities were being developed or not? And so we can look back and say, I was fairly distracted. I have a big meeting at work today, and I was mostly ruminating about rehearsing my presentation. And then, okay, fair. But then from the judging point of view, the judge will come and say, well, that was pathetic. I mean, what a waste of time. You're just thinking about work. I mean, you're really a useless meditator. So the discrimination is oriented towards the action, what was happening, what wasn't happening. No evaluation about the person, but the judge comes in and then makes an assessment based on our worth as a person and then writes us off as a meditator. That's the difference. We want to cultivate the discernment and see when the judgment's happening that's really eroding a sense of value.
Thank you. That was perfect. From there, I actually want to double back to the lawyer that you mentioned earlier, because this is a challenge that so many of us face, that we feel we have to get down on ourselves. We have to be judgmental, or I'm just going to become a bum. I'm not going to get anything done.
Yeah, a lot of people feel like if they didn't listen to the judge, they would never get out of bed, they would never clean their apartment, and they wouldn't go to work, and they would just sort of fester, on a park bench somewhere. I think we have a lot of different faculties in us that are much healthier ways of motivating. We can use aspiration, inspiration. We can use our conscience to make ethical decisions. We can use our faculties, like if we're trying to improve on something, we can bring an accurate discernment and evaluation. We can get other people's assessment of our work. And we all need that to grow and develop and refine our skills and talents and work and et cetera. But we don't need that negative, what some people call the critic, they call it the taskmaster or the tyrant, the doer that's pushing. There are other ways, I think, that are much more balanced that can motivate us. Because if we're pushed by the critic, then it's never enough, it's never good enough, it's never fast enough. And so no matter what we do, if we listen to that voice, it will always leave us feeling inadequate or unsatisfied. Whereas from a more balanced perspective, we do what we can, we make effort, and then we know when to call it a day. And we understand failure is part of success. Like, the founder of Honda used to say that 99% of success is failure. We need to, same with Edison Bell. He said he failed to create electricity 1,000 times before that light bulb popped. He said, failure is part of success. The critic just thinks failure means bad rather than a learning opportunity.
I like that. And that kind of takes us kind of to this area of vulnerability. And you have such a beautiful line in the book. You say, we must meet our pain with a kind heart, with a loving embrace, as if we were holding in our arms a loved one who is hurting.
Right. So, yeah, this is a really important part of the book. So we've talked a lot about mindfulness, and then the second part of the book is really how do we bring our heartfulness, kindness, care, warmth, friendliness, compassion to ourselves and each other. And, as human beings, we experience a lot of pain with sadness, loss, fear, regret, rejection, etc., abandonment. And then we have the secondary layer of our judge, criticizing, judging, and belittling ourselves, right? So we have a double layer of pain. And it's essential that we learn to meet that with kindness. When we can bring love to something, especially pain, it gives us more capacity to hold it. If we're clinically cold with something, it actually doesn't allow ourselves to grow. So it's important that we first, when we're suffering, whether it's in our lives or because of the critic or both, it's important we acknowledge, this is painful, this is difficult. When I first woke up in meditation when I was about 20, and I realized how painful it was to be talking to myself all the time, cruelly, harshly, critically, belittlingly, that's a word, I realized, wow, this is really painful. And I wouldn't tolerate anybody talking to me like that for more than 10 seconds. But we let ourselves berate ourselves. And I just felt the pain in my heart of how heavy it is and how depressing it is. And no wonder I felt bleak, because I was so down on myself. And so when I was able to see that, it actually broke open my heart to compassion, self-compassion, which is a really essential step in our lives of being with ourselves like we are with friends and loved ones, with care and kindness, and go, oh, yeah, this is hard. And the critic, no, that's not helpful to, judge ourselves for vulnerability, for weakness. We need to be with our vulnerability with tenderness, because let's face it, being human is vulnerable. We get old, we get sick, we can die, we can lose things. It's a vulnerable state. And so how great if we can meet that with kindness and friendliness rather than judgment.
How do we turn that self-hatred into kindness, or start cultivating that kindness inside of ourselves toward ourselves? Yeah.
So one of the practices that I teach, I think is most essential with the critic, is the practice of loving kindness, which is an ancient Buddhist practice, but it's really, I think, common to all religions. And really, it's a human quality, which is basically learning how to wish ourselves well. It's basically being a friend and an ally to ourselves and wishing the best for ourselves. So it's an aspirational, intentional practice. And why it's powerful with the critic is because it's using the same thought, pathways, neural pathways. So rather than saying you're bad, you're hopeless, you're never going to get your life together, instead with the loving kindness practice, or what's known as metta practice, you wish, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be safe, may I thrive, may I love myself unconditionally. And so it's a saying of phrases like that really express our heart's wish for ourselves. And what that does, in the similar way that mindfulness, even if it's a simple practice like paying attention to the breath, allows us to suddenly be more aware in our lives, if we practice this thread of kindness and benevolence through words to ourselves, it actually starts to have an impact. We start to see ourselves. We have these moments like, oh, I do really care for myself. I do really want myself to be well. I do really want to be happy. And the more we do that, the more it strengthens that sense of self-regard and builds up that sense of being an ally with ourselves rather than, from the critic's point of view, being an enemy of ourselves. And so we start to feel more caring, more self-protective, and we want to ally with our strength and vulnerability rather than with our weaknesses.
Woohoo! I'm thinking of how much more we could get done. Not that we have to be a doing rather than a being, but how much more successful we would be at anything in life, even if that's being happy, if we're on our own side rather than jabbing ourselves with a fork, to say the least.
Yeah, no, it's like we're doing double time. Life is hard enough, whether it's paying the bills, working, raising kids, multitasking, all the things we have to do in a day. And then we have this constant companion saying, well, you're not really a good parent, and, your driving's terrible, and your house is a mess, and, your writing sucks, and, it's like, it's a double duty. And so the more we can say, hey, good job for doing that, and, the way you took Johnny to school was fantastic, and, we're not being, we're being accurate with what we're doing. We're seeing the goodness that we do, and suddenly it brings more energy, because the critic is like a dead weight that's constantly sapping our life force, which is really good to see and good to make space from.
So you joke about holding a retreat at Esalen, and you're wondering why everybody who comes in was all negative about the retreat room that you're holding, until you realized it was to discuss the inner critic. They all brought him with them.
Right, exactly. So that was a funny moment where, I'm leading this workshop and I'm in a slightly funky room, and every single person comes in and says, well, carpet's a bit grubby, or, wow, the lights are dim, or this is a dingy small room, and I realized, of course I'm going to have everybody being critical, because I'm teaching a workshop on the inner critic, and that's the lens that we live through. So, as the saying goes, when a thief meets a saint, he sees his pockets. Right? When we live with the eyes of a critic, I see your faults. I see what's wrong with the world. I see what's wrong with myself. And when I let go of that perspective and learn to see the good and take in the good, I see, you have these strengths, you have these qualities, you have these gifts. And maybe I have some of those too. And then what a more life-affirming and energizing way to move through the world.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. How do we, before we start we're going to wrap things up here, or a few wrap-up questions in just a minute. Before that, how do we foster self-forgiveness?
Yeah, so that's a really important piece of both generating kindness for ourselves and also intercepting the critic's coulda, woulda, shoulda. So I believe that we all have innate goodness, and we all try to do the best that we can, given our resources and information and conditioning. And of course we make mistakes. And of course we do things that we regret. You know, we get reactive, we say things, we do things that in the heat of anger or hurt or jealousy, right? We're human. And we have to acknowledge that humanness, and we can look back with accuracy and go, wow, I was really unskillful. I really said something I didn't mean, or I did something I wish I could take back. And, you know, it's already done. What's done is done. What's said is said. And, you know, we can shift from guilt to remorse. Guilt is being imprisoned by the critic saying, you're bad, you're wrong, you screwed up. Remorse is like, wow, that was really unskillful. I'm going to try and make amends to this person, or I'm going to really learn. And, you know, next time I get so triggered, I'm going to zip it. I'm going to, you know, not let my words or my email, you know, I'm not going to send that email. And so we forgive ourselves in that we know we trust that we do the best we can given our circumstances and our limited resources. And then we move on and we make amends and we try again. You know, and we have to keep forgiving ourselves. Otherwise, we just chastise ourselves. And that chastising, we think that's going to make us better next time. It actually makes us shrink. It doesn't actually give us more resources. In the same way that when we're task mastering, oh, do better, that was terrible, we've got to work harder, that creates a constricted mindset. And that's not the place that we're generative or creative or really healthily productive.
I'm thinking of running, and it's one of the things we've been, both my wife and I, running coaches for many years. And if you put somebody in that position of a striving, a doing, you've got to do this, you've got to do better, you know, some with a negative emotion to it, you end up getting an amygdala response of fight or flight response. Everything tightens up, muscles pull as you're trying to drive yourself.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a good use phrase, that the amygdala hijack. You know, when our critic is operating, it often does trigger that fight, flight, fear, freeze response, and it takes our prefrontal cortex offline. It means we can't think clearly, and so we're not living and performing optimally. And so we want to see how the critic triggers that fear response, and then the more we can intercept it with humor, with lightness, with awareness, with compassion, or sometimes with a firmness. Sometimes I talk about the fierce love, how you know, as a mother protects a child who's being hurt, we might be fierce with a critic, saying, no, stop, that's not helpful, not truthful, not useful, I'm not going to listen, go bother somebody else. And so we can also take that more fierce stance with our critic and say, not useful, not going to let this interfere with what I'm doing, which is parenting or writing or teaching or whatever it is we do.
Thank you. From there, what can we learn from your good friend Alice?
My good friend Alice.
Who always finds the positive in someone. And I do realize that in books, names are changed to protect the innocent.
So what's great about Alice is she has worked with that side of herself that used to see things more critically and negatively, and has really cultivated this sense of looking at the positive, seeing people's strengths, seeing the goodness in people. And so it's really a delight to be with her at a dinner party or at work, or we're out just walking around the neighborhood. And I might, you know, have a judgment or two about somebody, or, you know, about some politician, or whatever. And she'll say, yeah, that's true. But, you know, there's also this, you know, and I notice this quality this person has, or, you know, look at the way that they're holding their kid's hand, or, you know, and can you see the light on the trees? And it's not Pollyannish as in everything's good, because she's also very clear that when things are wrong, there's some things to do. But there's a sense that she can always find the goodness in the personal situation, which is actually very energizing and life-affirming.
Woohoo! So a few quick questions before we jump into maybe a really short meditation. First off, Jessica, my wife, always likes me to ask a question of what advice would you give to parents to help their kids with their inner critic or setting their mind free?
Yeah, so I think what I said earlier about distinguishing the person from the action. So, you know, Jane comes home from school and she had a terrible soccer practice and they lost the soccer game, and she performed, you know, not as well as she normally does, and she says, I'm a terrible person, I let the team down, and you try and tease that distinction. No, honey, you're not a terrible person. You may have had, a low performance game. That happens to all of us. So we're normalizing difficulty, challenges, suboptimal performances and, failures and losses, and helping them tease apart. But that's not who you are, right? Your performance is not about who you are as a person. It's about your performance. And we can all improve and work and adjust and etc. So really helping them distinguish the bad boy, bad girl, phrasing and belief into, there's actions and words and things that we do we can work on. But you're essentially, your goodness and your wholeness as a person is not affected isn't less by, say, a bad sports game or performance or an exam.
Woohoo! There's something that pops in my mind as you say that, a freedom to fail, for the child to be able to try things and be okay that I'm not a loser or a bad person if it didn't work out.
Right, and then you can quote, there's a myriad of famous people, whether it's Bill Gates or, the ones I mentioned of Honda and Edison, Bell, and, most great successful people, had innumerable failures. That's how they got to be successful. Just what I love about Google, they'll put out a product and they know it's not going to be great. And they put it out so they get feedback, they iterate, and then they constantly refining and excelling in it. And they create wonderful products because they don't take failure as a problem, they take it as a learning opportunity, which I think once we are free from the shackles of the critic, we can learn, we can have that optimistic bias, and we can learn from failures and reframe them so they're just learning opportunities.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So a question we like to ask all of our guests just before the end is, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
So for me, I'm a nature lover, and so being outside wherever I am. Yesterday I was hiking in the rain in the redwoods and muirwoods. Getting outside, getting away from my computer and my phone, and just being in the elements and soaking up the beauty and the rawness and the wildness of nature with awareness and presence. That is my biggest love in the world. So my first book, called Awaken the Wild, is all about how do we explore nature with our full senses, with awareness, and that's really my passion in my work and my life.
I'm going to have to dive into that book, because I like to say nature is my practice, and I want to check that out. So on that note, where can people go to find your books and to find this beautiful book and to find out more?
So to find out more, you can go to my website, markcoleman.org, M-A-R-K, Coleman, C-O-L-E-M-A-N.org. You can, of course, buy the book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or hopefully your local bookstore. And there's a Facebook page, Make Peace with Your Mind. So any of those places, you can find out about the book and my work and my teaching in nature and in meditation retreats and companies. And I teach also at a place called Spirit Rock Meditation Center. So but all that's available, you can find on markcoleman.org.
Fantastic. And if you're driving down the road and you didn't catch that, don't try to write it down while you're driving. Come on over to InspireNationShow.com. We'll get you over to Mark as well. Mark, before we do a really short meditation, any last words of wisdom you want to share with people?
Well, first, just thank you for listening, but also to use this reflection as an invitation to pay attention. Well, how do I talk to myself? What are the thoughts in my head? How much do I believe my critic? How much do I give it attention and authority? And what are the ways I could begin to shift attention away from listening to it, believing it, and actually developing a more kind and accurate self-awareness? And that's possible for any of us in any moment.
Do you have a short meditation you'd be called to share with us?
Sure, yes. So let's go. So I just want to introduce people to a simple mindful awareness practice, and then I will flavor that towards the end with some awareness about the thoughts and the critic.
Fantastic. If we're driving down the road, should we wait to do this till later?
You should wait to do this till later if you're driving down the road.
Perfect.
Or pull over and then you can sit in the car. You can do this practice anywhere. We can cultivate mindfulness standing, walking, sitting. We could be in an elevator. We could be on the bus. We could be sitting on a nice armchair at home. You could be lying in bed at night at 3 a.m. with insomnia. The practice is simply to bring awareness to your experience. So we start by bringing awareness to your body. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, or at least have your gaze lowered. Bring your attention into your body. Just notice your posture. Notice how you're sitting or standing or lying. So mindfulness is simply being aware of what's happening, not interfering, not changing, not manipulating. And then bring awareness to your breath. Notice how you're breathing. Where do you feel and sense your breath? The nostrils, cool air coming in, warm air leaving, an expansion, your chest, rib cage, movement of your belly and diaphragm. Bringing a curious, kind attention, feeling, sensing all the sensations of the in-breath, the out-breath. Noticing and pause between breaths. And of course, you'll notice many other things. Sounds. We can be aware of sounds as we are present. Not getting lost in thinking about the source of the sound. Just be aware of sounds. Hearing and aware of hearing. Breathing, aware of breathing. Sensing the body and aware of sensing. And noticing when the attention wanders into thoughts, memories, plans, and without judgment, noticing that and returning the attention to this moment, this body, breathing, hearing. At times you may notice feelings come and go. Emotion, joy, sadness, anxiety, restlessness, fear. And we can name those. Oh, joy is like this. Peace is like this. Anxiety is like this. Feeling it, allowing it. And you can always resume awareness of the breath, the body. Nothing extra to do, simply being present to what's here. Sensing, breathing, listening, feeling, and we can also be mindful of our thoughts, noticing thoughts, ruminations, planning, remembering, and also noticing any critical thoughts, any judgments, things you haven't done, should have done, could have done. And simply noticing, naming, oh, judging. Judgments are like this. And then let them go, not giving them attention, and you shift your attention to something that's happening in the present moment. Breathing, sensing, listening to sounds, feeling. So we come over and over to what's here, shifting away from that critical voice. And then lastly, we offer ourselves some aspirational wishes and loving kindness. So just say these words to yourself quietly as I say them. May I be safe. May I be healthy and strong. May I be happy and peaceful. May I live my life with ease. May I love and accept myself just as I am. And whatever other wish you have for yourself. And then letting those words go, coming back into your body, and opening your eyes. And know that you can carry this presence, this awareness, at any time, any moment. But also, you can also call to mind those phrases. You're sitting on a bus, you're standing in line. Oh, may I be happy? Or may this person be happy? May we all be happy? So you're cultivating a positive, wholesome state of mind rather than listening to the drone of the critic on what's wrong and what's not good enough.
Thank you so much, Mark. This has been beautiful. That was beautiful. I think this will help challenge people to flip the mirror not towards what's wrong, but to look at some kindness, compassion, and love to ourselves.
Great.
So, thank you so much. Got to crank it back up for the finish here.
Okay.
For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, make peace with your mind, and free yourself from your inner critic, and shine bright. Woohoo!
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, InspireNationShow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!